Hi, my name's Ben, and I like to talk about video games. Today I'm going to be talking about a game I've played way too much, and I'm going to talk about it for way too long. Hyper Light Drifter is an action-adventure game that came out in 2016. It's an action-adventure game because every game is an action-adventure game if you want it to be. This game has lived in my head rent-free since 2016 because I made a video about it when it came out, saying it was my game of the year. This game came out in March, and I was already shouting GOTY at it. The funny thing is that I can think of at least 5 games that are as good, if not better than this game that came out that year. I wanted to revisit this game because I liked it, and I thought that it had been forgotten by the gaming community. With Heart Machine's next game coming out whenever they feel like releasing it, I felt like it was a good time to remind people about this great game. I was wrong though, because not only has this game not been forgotten, people still love it.
Next, I think it's gotta be Hyper Light Drifter. One of the coolest games I have ever played.
People make content about it and there's still speedruns of the game at GDC, but I've already put a lot of time and effort into this, and the sunk cost fallacy won't let me scrap another script. Before we Hyper Light drift into this analysis, let's do a quick review of the game. Hyper Light Drifter is a game you would pick up on Friday and be done with by Sunday. It's a great game to go through on a weekend, and if you decide to put more time into it, the New Game Plus mode is rewarding to go through. The story of the game is great, but you probably would need a wiki to fully understand it. If you like abstract games that are light on details and heavy on atmosphere, then you'll enjoy what's going on here. The game isn't told to you, it's more shown to you. There's very little written out in the game, and you're shown the story in animations, environment design, and detailed pictures. The pixel art of the game is good, and I'd recommend the game to anybody who likes neat audio and visual design. I also recommend it to anybody who likes a good combat system. The system here is simple, but the enemy and arena design takes the combat from simple to challenging and fun. It's well developed, and this game is pretty great all around. If you're the kind of person who likes scores, then I would say this game is a solid B, maybe more of a B+. I think that this covers the basis for a review, but I want to do an analysis. Because I'm not just a gamer, I'm a hardcore gamer. When I play a video game, I drop words like iframes, and ludonarrative dissonance. And Nick, with my hardcore gamer boy title, I have to talk about a video game with way more detail than anyone would want to hear. So, if you aren't into that, you probably shouldn't watch this video. You probably shouldn't watch this video if you plan on playing the game either, because I'm going to spoil everything I can about this game. As a matter of fact, you just shouldn't watch this video because it's going to be really bad. If the entirety of what I've said hasn't convinced you to go away yet, let's drift into that Hyper Light that I mentioned earlier. As I said before, this game doesn't want to tell you anything. It wants you to experience it with your heart. Aww. Machine. Which means that the opening cinematic doesn't explain shit. So I'll have to do my best as narrator and explain what's going on. This is going to be tough to do because I also don't know what's going on. We open with the city being bombed. If you think that seems a bit morbid, baby, we're just getting started because right after that we see a bunch of dead bodies. We see our drifter pop up. He coughs up blood, and that blood that was inside of us turns into our main antagonist of the game. Symbolism. After he runs away, he sees the Sentinels from X-Men, then he sees a badass looking dog. After wading through the darkness, it gets pushed back by our main objective in the game, a diamond. Only for us to get overtaken by the darkness anyway. I don't know if you noticed, but I just spoiled the whole game right there. While the cinematic is powerful and the sound design, art design, and animations make you all curious about what it all means, it almost explains nothing about our world. So let me give you even more backstory to the game. Long ago, sometime before the city got Hiroshimaed, the 4 races got together and created the Immortal Cell. This cell was meant to make everyone live forever. Instead, a group of people with advanced technology created the Sentinels and other fun killing machines. Instead of Sentinels killing mutated people, though, they instead were sent after mutated furries. Unfortunately, they failed at their job, and the furries continued to live. Each of the furry races had their own way of dealing with these Sentinels. Trademark. 2 of the races ran like little pussies. One of the races popped on a suit of weeb armor and then squared the fuck up. These races of weeaboos also fought against a strange race of blue people. Those blue people may or may not still be chilling around, getting drunk as shit, and spreading as much of COVID-19 as they can. This leads us to our drifter. He is our terminally ill protagonist and is looking for a cure. For some reason, the dog god is showing us where to go and how to get it. Got all that? I hope I painted a good picture because with the research I did on this game, I'm now a Hyper Light Driftstorian. For all you losers out there who actually like to know what the gameplay is like in games, rest assured that there's a solid combat system here. The combat in the game is simple and pretty easy to pick up. This doesn't mean that the game isn't challenging though. Let's start with the melee attack. You have a close range swipe that lets you hit enemies in sets of 3 swings. The drifter resets in a way after these 3 swings, so you can't just unload 45 hit combos on enemies. Most enemies are designed to attack you when you get into close range, so the sword swipe is a bit of a risky attack to do, which is why we have a couple mechanics around the sword swipe to consider. Dashing in the game is our replacement for a jump. It allows us to go over gaps in the environment and close gaps between us and the enemy. It actually takes a bit of skill because the timings for the dash can be tough to get down. In other games, if you were to spam the dash, roll, or dodge, your buttons would be queued up to perform the animation as soon as possible. Think of Hades dashes. You slap the button twice and Chagrius does a double dash. The Virgin Drifter needs to have precise timing to have dashes done. There are two types of dashes to consider as well, but that's a conversation for another time. Just know that you can't endlessly Nightcrawler dash all over the place. Dashing is also part of platforming as well, so we're going to put a few pins in this topic for a little while. We also have a gun. First we start off with a pistol, but we get more guns later. Put a shotgun-sized pin in that one for a while. The pistol shoots off one bullet in whatever direction endlessly. You gain back bullets by hitting enemies with your sword. With the pistol, you get a convenient 1 hit equals 1 bullet ratio. These three elements, dashing, swiping, and enacting your Second Amendment right, make the basis of the entire combat system. We learn this quickly in the tutorial. We have some well-placed objects that block our path and make us learn the mechanics to continue, and some other not so well-placed things that just tell us what we need to know. One of the good things that we run into is the Dirk. Our first enemy is a perfectly crafted enemy to teach us this system. The Dirk to Dirk has a wind-up attack that will interrupt any swipe you're doing. If you don't confidently go in and connect with all three of your swipes, you'll get hit by this enemy, losing a square of health. If you miss and try to, heaven forbid, do 4 swipes, you're going to learn the reset that the Drifter needs to do between sets of swings takes a little while. Not horribly long, but this is a fast-paced combat system. You'll probably learn this fact the hard way. Animations that take a while become noticeable quickly because every second in combat matters. The Dirk slaps this into you if you don't figure it out right away. The best way to take this enemy out is to confidently rush in and take out its life quickly, or dash in, sneak in a strike, and then dash back out. When you're first starting the game, both of these are tough to get the timing down. The length of the sword and the strict timing of the dashes takes some getting used to. The Dirk is a well-designed enemy, but not a strict one, which is good because you're about to get into a fight with multiple of them in a second. Between these fights, we get a gun, and thus we've completed our entire combat system. We have a gun with a limited clip that can be used from a safe distance. To refill this clip, we have to make risky swipes with the sword. How hitting someone with a sword reloads your gun beats me. Don't think about that too much though. That's my job. In this game, you'll quickly take advantage of the dash. Closing in on enemies and escaping from oncoming attacks is essential. You'll eventually figure out the best method that you'd prefer with all the enemies in the game. Some enemies are easy that you take out with a swipe, and some enemies are assholes that you shoot from a distance. A small vertical slice of this is the second encounter in the tutorial. We get 2 Dirks and a shooty bro. That's not his name, but me spouting wrong information is going to be a running theme in this video. Diving into these enemies will get us hit, and staying far back will get us shot. So the correct answer is to keep moving and getting swipes and shots in whenever we can. There's no obvious one correct answer to this gameplay problem, and there isn't a binary answer of just shoot or sword. You have to play with the flow of combat and master the system and the enemies. This is a good start to the game because these are the easy guys. They show up everywhere because I guess they have a serious case of FOMO or something. Once we leave the tutorial, we cough up a bunch of blood and get brought back to health by a pink guy. He's called the Guardian by the community, but I'm not as creative as the community, so I call him Pink Guy. We awaken his house, and most players will have the immediate instinct to wreck as much stuff as we can in this house. We pick up a map and we get shown twice what our main goals are for the game. There are shards that complete a diamond, 4 in each of the areas. The diamond is designed to point to each of these areas: north, south, east, and west. Some players might gravitate to one direction immediately. I feel like most players will want to go in a direction, but will instead explore the town the Pink Guy lives in. The central town is a neat place. It houses the shops that we have to go to for upgrades. We can't get any at the moment because currency in this game is gained through combat and exploration. This is a great incentive though to come back and see what we might want. Not being able to get what we want right away is for the best. Having us go out and explore the mechanics of the game first before we start randomly upgrading is way better. If we can check out the shops now, we do see gifts of what abilities we can gain before we actually use the combat system. While we play, we'll think about what abilities we want most. When we inevitably come back to town, we will go back to the shop and upgrade. I'm going to go more into detail about the upgrades, but it's going to be a while before then. I just want to focus on how the town points out upgrades and implants the idea of how combat can be improved early on. Outside of the shops, we don't get much else. The only other things we get are incentives to come back later and some story beats. The incentives are pillars that block our way from a path. At this point, I doubt any player would automatically understand that they need to beat a boss in one of the regions to enter the area. These pillars are used in other areas to teach this to the player throughout the game. You beat the boss, the pillar drops, you get the goodies. The story beats here are surprisingly not that important. The importance they hold for most players is building up this world. Sorry to say, but this world is kinda depressing and awful to be in. You find a guy drinking a whole ton who got beat up in an alley, and you find a shop owner who got jumped by monsters. Luckily, Pink Guy was there to look badass and bounce. If these parts of the Hyperlight Drifter universe, the dead bodies and the alcoholism, don't paint the picture of this world, the 4 regions will for sure. A player will gravitate towards one of these regions. They can explore them in an open-ended order. Each path leads to its own full area with an end boss and everything. The south area is cut off by pillars I mentioned earlier, so that leaves the north, west, and east. Personally, I think the west side is a lot like America's west side. The west side is the best side. It's also the most dangerous, irritating, and confusing, so you shouldn't go there. I believe the north side is what the community thinks is the best side to start with. I do agree that it's overall easier than the east side, but I think the best starting point is the east side. To explain why, I'm just going to have to explain every single boss, enemy, and area to show you why. So let's go hang out with the Weeb Frogs and the Taliban plants. Who wrote this? What the hell? The east side has a lot going for it. It has a beautiful scenery that contrasts all the dead bodies around. There's some fucked up stuff going on here, and that keeps us intrigued and motivated to move through the area. The first enemy we see is a frog dragging a dead body, and we quickly see a bunch of skinned white-furred dogs. Going into the underground area, we see floating bodies of these dogs. We eventually run into a chained-up one, and we see the frogs in this area have taken over and started skinning and enslaving these cute little guys. When I first played this game back in 2016, seeing this stuff was powerful for me. I felt genuine anger towards these frogs for what they've done to this adorable race. Now, before I get onto the enemies and the level design of the area, I have to mention something important. I know I called these dogs cute. That does not mean I'm a furry. I don't want to do anything sexual with them. I just think they're cute in a normal, not gross way. So I know what you're thinking, but don't think that about me. I am not a furry. Not a furry. Now that we got that out the way, let's get onto the actual level. Regions are typically composed of 2 parts, the above ground and the underground. Above ground is, as I said before, beautiful. The temple has a clear watered swamp where there are overgrown plants taking over the statues and the buildings. It all feels like it's floating on some deep lake, but we do go underground, so who knows if it's that deep at all. The underground is less cool. All the other levels have an underground area that you frequently go back and forth between there and the surface. The surfaces are all varied and interesting, but the undergrounds all blend together. Even though they all have different environmental storytelling elements, and they will eventually have different color palettes, they'll just blur together in your head. You'd have to go out of your way to recognize the differences. Here the underground appears to be an underwater factory, or a power plant of some kind. You get a nice view of the outside window. Oh, never mind. The first time we go underground, we have to dash our way over a gap in the walkway. Most players will notice how the area sort of branches off into 2 directions. You are also shown visually that something is in the branched off area. If we follow this branching off the walkway to the path less traveled, then we'll see our first shard. The first shard is basically a gimme, but it incepts into our brain the positives of exploring. The players paying attention to the environment and actively exploring are immediately rewarded if they go to the east area first instead of the north area. Exploration in this game is a huge part of the experience, and I feel like the immediate reward in this area helps make it a good start for most players. We'll for sure be getting into exploration, but I don't really feel like it this early on. I'm going to procrastinate that like I procrastinate making this video. As we continue onwards, we'll run into enemies. Not groups of enemies, but more so just 1 or 2 stragglers to keep combat paced and the player engaged. It isn't until we run into our first arena that traps us that we get our first real combat encounter. If there's a solid argument for why the east area isn't the best one to start with, it's that there's 2 arenas here that really screw you over. This will be the first one. So far, we've met a few enemies. One of them is these cute little plant guys. They crawl around and are one hit to kill. Their main goal is to run directly at you and dive into your sword. Seems like a simple enemy that should attack in groups, right? Wrong. They explode after you kill them, so you have to make sure not to be around after they're killed. If you melee strike them, you gotta go. If you shoot them, you gotta make sure you don't dash into their explosion. You might think that only a dumbass would do that, but for some reason I did that a bunch. When this little guy is thrown in with other enemies, he makes you very conscious of the movements that you're making. If you aren't, you'll get knocked down and get real familiar with the checkpoint system. This little guy isn't the problem here. It's his roided out big brother, and this little guy together that's the problem. The roided out plant has a lot of health and does a nice dive attack that knocks you over. You can't stop the attack midway through, and you do get jumped by about 4 of these guys in this room. It's not so bad if you're used to the dash system or you have a shotgun, You get the shotgun in this game right after you beat the East area, so... oh yeah. Yet another reason why we should start here. Me and you are definitely going to be talking about the shotgun later. Look, the room here is tough, but it's a good way for the player to learn that the game just does not give a fuck about you. The gameplay feels the most rewarding when it becomes a challenge like this, and knowing you gotta be good to get through early on is better to learn early on. The path branches here and you get a more open level with optional sections. You get a shard here and you get a taste of the types of platforming challenges you can do later in the game. Not now, because I decided you should come back here after you get any upgrades. I'm not going to go through every room in this game with a magnifying glass, so let's just jump ahead to the next tough fight that I mentioned earlier. While that room is tough, I find the frogs are a little hard to deal with over time. Projectile weapons are always a thorn in your side throughout the game, for the same reason that they work for you. The projectiles are safe for the enemy at a distance, and this game is all about closing in on that distance. You get the abilities to deal with this later, but for now we're just going to have to put up with it. The weeb frogs are wannabe ninjas, who throw shuriken the size of 12-year-old children and hop around just to fuck with you. Their projectile is fast, and I feel like I never got used to the speed of it. You get some purple guys as well. They shoot a spray pattern at you, and this does a lot of damage up close. I call them shotgun frogs in my head, so we're just gonna go with that. Both of these guys are projectile based and quick to kill. When it's just one or two of these guys, everything is a good time. They look cool and are only slightly annoying. It's when they get paired in squads of 10 that things get a little groovy. This one time we walked down a set of stairs and we could see across a small gap that we have to cross. Across this gap is a gang of 15 enemies all on different platforms. They are all ready to get groovy. This area is a bitch because you have to constantly stay moving, and when you think you have a safe spot to think, the weebs just use Shadow Clone Jutsu to surround you, and they're throwing stuff and spazzing out at the same time. If you try to shoot these guys, you'll run out of bullets. If you try to run to attack them, you'll run out of health. The best advice I have here is just to get better at the game. Hope you brought enough health packs. Now's a good time to talk about healing, since doing it in this arena is a bitch to do. Health in this game is shown in 5 green squares, and they represent the 5 hit points we get in this game. Unless you're playing on New Game Plus. Hits from enemies only take 1 or 2 squares, but enemies can team up on you and take out more. Here's an example. Healing with a health pack takes you back up to full health. This isn't a guarantee though. To heal you have to stand still and play out an animation. This game has a lot of similarities to The Game That Must Not Be Named. During, or after this animation, I don't know, your health recovers 1 square at a time. When you're all alone, this isn't even something worth mentioning. During a combat encounter, when you're, say, I don't know, fighting the entire village hidden in the swamp, this small amount of time is everything. You need to find space in this hectic combat arena to allow this animation to play, or else you'll waste your precious health pack. I call them precious because you can only hold a limited number of these, and you only get them whenever the game feels like leaving them around for you to pick up. If you're hit in the middle of your squares refilling, the healing process stops in its tracks. This means you're out of a health pack, and you also have to try to find a spot to heal all over again. Just like other game systems, this can be harsh, but it makes you play with intentionality. You are expected to master this, and the test of this mastery comes in challenging arenas like this one. There are other tough parts here, but these are the 2 big ones worth mentioning. There is one more big enemy worth mentioning though. In the lead up to the boss, we get to see a staggering number of encampments, along with reminders that the frogs aren't so nice to the doggers. By the way, I know the white creatures here are otters, but come on, they never look like otters, and dogs are way cuter anyway. Cuter in an unsexy way, that is. We enter through the door and we walk towards our first boss in the game. A giant frog comes in and casually throws an otter in his mouth, as though they were just one of the many the boss had eaten that day. It coughs up blood and wipes it off like it spilled a little coffee on its chin. This stirred something up in me. I don't think I've ever been more hyped up to fight and kill a boss since I first faced this boss back in 2016. Seeing as how it was the cause of the awful way these dogs have been treated, I was full of anger that wasn't sexually charged towards this frog. Overall, this is a pretty good boss fight, especially as an early on fight in the game. He was built up with the story of this area, and he's one of the 2 bosses that aren't just slightly larger humans that we get in the game. He always starts off with throwing jars of fire at you, and the jars follow you to make sure that you stay moving. If you get too close to swipe at him, he'll do a telegraphed close-range slam near you. As per usual, the game isn't giving you a binary choice here on what's the best to do. If you stay too close, you get slammed, and if you stay too far away, you get jarred. Knowing the timing and moving with intentionality is the best way to get through these moves. This isn't all the big boy does though. He summons those little cherry bomb guys we mentioned earlier in the cutest fashion possible, and then they follow us around. We already went over how these enemies work in the context of a fight, and that stays true here. Summoning enemies can be annoying in games, and a cheap way to make a boss harder. This boss makes it work because he can kill his own summons, and if you kill the summons in the right way, you can use them against him. A well-timed explosion, and you can knock him to the ground and show him how annoying it is to get knocked down in this game. This boss is great for beginners too because he isn't a boss that you would need abilities with. Spoilers, this game's gameplay feels more natural and exciting when you have some abilities to play around with. There are only a couple bosses in this game that feel like they were designed to be fun without any abilities, and we're looking at one of the two right here. My only issue with him is that he's just too easy. I don't think I've ever lost to this boss more than 2 times in a row in all my playthroughs, and I suck at video games. He's also easier to cheese than macaroni. Yeah, that's an awful joke. That's like a joke my mom would like. I mean, I've been able to beat this boss in 30 seconds before, and that's without the shotgun. Now that I mention it, I guess it's time we talk about the shotgun. After we beat this boss, we get our first reward. We get to activate the tower that connects to the pillars and the center of town, and we get another shard. After we collect 4 of these, we see an intimidating visual of our drifter being ruthlessly killed and left for dead, with nothing but images of impending doom left with our dead body. Then we get a cool gun. The shotgun is without a doubt the best gun in the game. This is the main reason why going for the east area is the best place to start. To explain the shotgun, I'll have to explain pretty much all the guns in the game. I'm sure you're asking, do you have to? The answer's no, but I'ma do it anyway. Guns. An American pastime. If you couldn't tell, I'm from the #1 greatest country in the world, voted on by all 50 states of America. Here, in America, we prefer to take out our enemies with well-placed drone strikes, but we can appreciate all kinds of weapons. While the pistol in this game is good, it's known across games to be a secondary kind of weapon. After the first 3 bosses, you unlock new weapons. These typically have lower rates of fire and smaller clips, but produce more power. Depending on the situation, you might just want to use something that's a bit stronger or a gun that can shoot through enemies. The railgun can do just that. It takes longer to shoot, but it creates a laser that can shoot through enemies. It also provides an aimed sightline that shows where your attack will land. The next gun is called a big pistol. Sorry, I don't drink enough vodka to pronounce that word correctly. The gun doesn't shoot as fast, but the bullet you shoot is larger and takes out more health. There are other guns, but you probably won't get them in your first playthrough, so who cares? You have to unlock an 8-shard door in order to get one, and you'll have to find another one behind a door with a ton of keys. I haven't even gone over exploring yet, so I'm not even going to go into that now. I'm sure you wouldn't want to do it even if you knew what I was talking about. Even still, I'ma do it anyway! One gun is a lot like a railgun I mentioned. It has a lot less shots and requires a lot more time to shoot and has a lot of reasons not to use it. When shots eventually land, it takes out a ton of health. All you have to do is schedule an appointment to shoot the gun or else you won't have enough time to use it. The next gun is a lot like a shotgun except the bullets move in a cone shape, giving you a larger range to hit something. The downside is that it doesn't hit as hard. That sounds great, but what makes the shotgun so good? Well, voice in my head that asks a lot of obscure questions, it kind of breaks the game. Shotguns are always awesome in games. They're excellently designed risk-reward in shooters. It's satisfying to pull off a well-executed shot and receive this award, usually some sort of kill. They have a high damage output, but only in close range. This means if you can get up close, your enemy will be taken out almost entirely within one shot. The skill comes from getting yourself close enough to shoot the enemy without having him shoot you first. It's risky to pull off, but the reward is satisfying. This isn't really something that works in this game, though. As we went over, the game has a balance with safe distance gunshots and risky close-range swipes. The swipes are worth doing because they allow us to do safe distance shots. With this system, all enemies need to allow you to get close to them. Staying too close for too long punishes the player with getting hit or overwhelmed by enemies. This causes you to think, prioritize enemies based on health, and constantly stay moving. With a shotgun, you can shoot a wide range of bullets in a short distance. In most games, the difficulty would be in getting close to the enemy. This game doesn't have that because you're meant to inevitably get close to the enemy. If you even get decent with the shotgun and the movement system, you can get close enough to the enemy to unload all the bullets into them. This will take out most enemies or make it so that you just need to quickly swipe right after the shot in most situations. After you pull this off, the game almost immediately loses a chunk of its difficulty. Only mobs of enemies become difficult after this, and even some boss battles lose any edge they might have had. I'm telling you, if you played this game and used the shotgun for most of the playthrough, try playing again without it. This will make you think more in fights and will make the bosses more of an endurance challenge. I should probably mention the story in this section. Like I've said before, the story here is hard to decipher. Luckily, we get some subtle environmental storytelling. I used to think the frogs here took over the area because of their intense need to be assholes. Over time, I realized they must have taken over for the resource that's littered throughout the area. This fire stuff, which may or may not be the hyperlight of this game, is something the frogs have an interest in. You could find them carrying it off or using it in battle. The frog gluttony here uses it, and the shotgun guys use it in the same way. So it looks like they took over for the valuable resource of the pink flame, and the land also happens to be bountiful in food, fur, and labor. If you want a better synopsis of the story, you can only get it from the monuments we find throughout the game. There are these giant tablets that have this language that pops up. The language is similar to a language that we have in the real world that's also impossible to read without an expert to guide you. In English, when everything is translated, we get a poetic haiku that explains everything that happened in the area. The dog people who run this land were giant pussies who ran away from everything and liked this fire. Wow. Enlightening. There is depth here, and I'll try to go over interpretations of the story when we go through everything towards the end. Let's move on to the north section. Here we got the bird boys. We make a cool ascent up a mountain and slowly uncover another temple. Okay, so there's a lot of temples in the game, but unlike the underground factories, these have distinct color palettes that make it clear where you are. Also, the enemy design makes you play differently than the last area. The birds here have figured out the most powerful technology of all: actual magic. The enemies don't differentiate themselves as much as the enemies in the East region do, but here we get a vastly different moveset from each enemy. First, we get another enemy that dies in one hit. They're harder to kill, and they have a neat design to them. They fly in the air, which is pretty typical for birds, but when they're in the air, they can't be hit with your sword. They can only be hit when they swoop down for an attack. If you mess up the timing, you'll take damage and the bird will stay alive. The timing is hard to get down, especially when they're mixed with other enemies. They can be shot out the air with a gun, which is pretty typical for birds. This enemy has a good dexterity test and also adds to the gun-sword dynamic in the game. The next guy we have uses magic. He summons a beam that shoots a straight line at you. It does 2 damage to you, and that's all I have in my notes about this guy. He's pretty straightforward, and there isn't really a fun dynamic to him outside of watch out for that beam. I know these guys are called cultists by the developers, but I prefer to call this guy Beam Bird. The reason behind the name is pretty complex, but we don't have time to explain why Beam Bird is called Beam Bird. All Beam Bird does is walk up to you and stand there to be killed. He's even worse than the basic enemy we start with. The next guy looks like a shaman or a creepy plague doctor. This enemy is more fun. He has a modest health pool and a variety of attacks. He summons 3 pink dots at you that follow you around, and if you get close, he gives you a square that foreshadows the final boss of this area. He's almost never alone and will even attack in pairs. He's abnormally hard to fight in New Game Plus because the square he summons takes out 2 squares of health. Good thing we went to the East region first and picked up the shotgun. Oh, you have 5 squares of health? What a coincidence. This shotgun shell has about 5 bullets in it. His name will be Shaman Bird. These names hold no significance over the analysis, but I will continue to name all these creatures. Next we have the dogs. They're annoying. We'll call them D-Dogs because there was a dog in MGS5 called Diamond Dog, and that seems like the coolest name ever. I'm going to go ahead and complain about these guys later on. Anyone who's played this game before knows what I mean when I say fuck dogs. All these enemies create situations where timing and movement are important. Beam Bird isn't hard to kill, but if you're too slow to kill him, then he'll get hit with those beams, and those beams hit hard. The timing of the birds, yes that's what I call them, is tough to pull off, so you'll have to make decisions on whether or not to use the bullets to go hunting, or just get good and time your sword swings right. The Shaman Bird is just a regular designed enemy. Moves that are used at different ranges to keep you moving, and a high health pool to make you avoid using one tactic. Unless you utilize the best tactic in the game. Now that the enemies of the level have been explained, I bet you want me to go over the level design of the area. The level design of this area differs with these platforms that drop. You walk over them, and they drop and you lose a square of health. That's about it. I guess it's time to talk about the level design. The level design of each area doesn't change much. The outside coat of paint changes on these levels, but if you were to just strip away the visual design, you'd have a hard time telling the levels apart. This doesn't become apparent until you go underground where the visuals get mixed together. All the areas don't have much to differentiate themselves, except for the west area. For some reason, the west area got all the cool stuff. The south area gets a good mix of stuff, but that's supposed to be an endgame area. Even then, it doesn't get anything new except different enemies. All the east side has that's worth mentioning is the barrels of fire that are there. This is why I focus more on the enemies in the area rather than the design of the actual level. Don't mistake me for saying that this game has bad level design. My brief walkthrough of the east side should show you how intentional the game design is. Terrain, walkways, and false doors are placed to surprise you, and arenas are designed to make you concentrate on movement, timing, and range of attacks. The best examples are some of my favorite arenas in the north area. My favorite arena in the game is a fight where the walls and pillars go up and down throughout the encounter. There's some dropping platforms on the side too that forces us to frantically dash and makes us take advantage of the cover that shifts throughout the fight. We also meet the rocket assholes here. Just like the D-Dogs, I'm going to complain about these guys a little later. We have another section where we have to walk through a small, spread out group of enemies, and then activate the power in the room to unlock a door. Activating the power, though, creates a platforming challenge for us by having to backtrack through the shifting blocks. It makes backtracking fun, and it's something I think the level designer would be happy to know I noticed. The last encounter I want to mention is from a moment from the East region. You walk towards where you think the game wants you to progress, only to find that there's no way to cross the water. When you backtrack, there's suddenly a group of enemies there to ambush you. Cleverly done, and when it's done this early in the game, it leaves you guessing on when the next fight's gonna be. I'd say that this stuff adds up to levels that are a pleasure to go through, but outside of their unique coat of paint, there just isn't enough to differentiate them. This isn't as big of an issue as I'm making it out to be. This is a 5 to 10 hour adventure. If this were a 40-hour game, then I'd be harsher on this aspect. It's still good level design all around. Another thing that's consistent in this game is Pink Guy. He shows up somewhere around the beginning of the level. You can catch him being badass and killing people. When you talk to him, he just lets you know where the shards are. This seems nice and probably an essential part of the game. Spoiler alert, this map is useless, and so is this information. His conversation is less about information and more about how neat it is to run into somebody who actually wants to talk to you. Plus, he starts coughing up blood after a while. His first conversation does give you information that he's facing a very similar cosmic horror, so that's nice. Pink Guy has a weird place in this story. He's simultaneously one of the most important characters in the game, yet surprisingly easy to cut out the story if you wanted to. We'll talk about him and the story more later. So what's the story of the North area? In each area, we meet somebody who lets us know an overview of what's going on here. In the East region, we have a dog slave that tells us about their own plight, and we run into another person here who gives us a similar rundown. Life was cool, then they were attacked. Now shit sucks. On the surface level, these are just good reasons to kill the enemies here without needing to feel bad about running into an area and wiping out the population. These NPCs are kind of just the devs' way of saying, oh yeah, these enemies are total assholes. Don't worry about murdering all of them. But if you're one of those losers who need to know character motivation and feel like ethical about their genocides, there is some more depth to this. When you want to know the story of Hyper Light Drifter, refer to the haiku. In the North region, there was a temple. Life was cool. Then someone figured out this simple technique to live forever. All you had to do was a little sacrificing. This caused a few problems. The temple split into two groups. Those who were fine with sacrificing people, and those who were going to be sacrificed. Only 2 guys were able to escape, and luckily they were able to save some of the birds. I've said this before, but this world in Hyper Light Drifter is awful to live in. We even see one of the birds get sacrificed when we walk into the final boss of the area. Big Bird. Big Bird is one of the best bosses in the game. He's a simple concept, but this simple concept is used well. All he does is create square platforms that hurt you and summon the birds. That's it. The platforms take out 2 squares of health, and they're created in different patterns that are telegraphed. Just so things aren't simple, he changes up the patterns during different phases and teleports around the room. This may sound lame, but this is actually one of my favorite bosses in the game. The square platforms make you move, and you can't stay close to him and spam shotgun swipe. He will summon a platform around him, just like the shamans. His new patterns and his teleporting make him unpredictable enough to be interesting, but his simple pattern makes him predictable enough to know how to react to him. His summons could be annoying, but they're an essential part of the fight. They're a good opportunity to get back some bullets used on the boss, or you could use the bullets to take them out quickly to focus on the boss. They avoid being annoying because they can be killed by the attacks that you have to dodge. This helps with the story because they're being sacrificed, and this also helps to build up the boss as an actual, boss. When bosses kill their lackeys, it feels like the minor enemies really are just henchmen for the final boss of the area. I have 3 complaints for this boss. Most bosses have moves that let you utilize abilities against them. This one doesn't really have that. You can't knock back these squares towards him, and you can't send him flying with a dash or anything like that. The only mechanics I think help here with this one is the passive abilities, bombs, and the double dash. This is fine because this is supposed to be your first or second boss fight. The second issue I have is his telegraphs are a smidge too quick. This makes you have to trial and error fight him, but I don't think it's awful. The next issue I have is that his final phase is too predictable. After fighting this boss so many times, the final phase is easier than his first phase. And I fought this boss a ton because he's a bitch to fight on New Game Plus. The fact that all of his moves take 2 squares of health makes you have to perfect run this boss or else you just can't win. These fights with him though have made me appreciate him, and it's pretty good that I only have a couple small complaints about him. I keep bringing up playthroughs of this game that I've done in this analysis, but I haven't detailed any of the playthroughs yet. Other analysts would do this towards the beginning of the video to show their expertise in the game. I have a reputation for being a bad writer to keep up though, so I'm gonna do it right in the middle. I've played this game back in 2016, called it my game of the year, and then didn't play it again for 5 years. I played it again, then again on New Game Plus. Then I found out that there was an alternate drifter who works with mouse and keyboard controls, so I played with that as well. It's neat because you don't play as the drifter. Instead, you play as somebody who looks like, Okay, so I'm not a furry, but I role-played as one for this review. The differences here are small at first, but have exponential effects. First difference to point out is that you have 3 squares of health instead of 5. Seems tough at first, but it isn't that bad. Most attacks only take out 1 square of health, and while a lot take out 2, none take out 3. As long as you don't get yourself overwhelmed by enemies and upgrade your health packs, you won't have a tough time. This playthrough was actually incredibly easy for me. There's a huge advantage with the new melee strike we get. We don't have a sword in this run, we have some sort of ball. We use it like some threatening paddle ball, and this is how we clear enemies out. Instead of swiping like the sword does, it shoots out in a straight line, then comes back to the player. This is a very precise attack because we can aim with the mouse instead of the analog stick. The gun is also easier to aim at longer ranges, which makes those safe shots at a distance even safer and deadlier. With our paddle ball shooting in a straight line, there had to be some rebalancing. The sword swings in a wide arc, but is much shorter than this narrow line. The narrow line goes out much farther though. The idea here is that you'd have to choose between short and wide and narrow and long. The issue is the narrow line is just as quick, if not quicker than the sword swipe. Enemies in this game are designed around the drifter's sword length and don't attack until they're in a certain range. What is considered a dangerous range from the enemy for the drifter isn't a range the furry ever has to go into. With this, and knowing all the boss patterns and where the secrets are, the furry run is just way easier than any run with the drifter. I would only recommend it to people who want to play the game again, but slightly different this time. I thought that some of the abilities would be harder in the furry run, but no. The double dash is kind of better since it goes in your cursor's direction, and dashing on the keyboard is easier for some people. There's an ability that knocks back bullets, and despite what I expected, it's just as easy to use, if not easier. The hitboxes of the enemies and the range that they all do damage is based around the drifter, so I'm just writing this whole run of the game off. I'm sure you want to hear about things like platforming, exploration, and the abilities, but I'm trying to spread things out and make the structure more interesting, so let's talk about the New Game Plus run I did. Hyper Light Drifter is one of those games where the first run of the game prepares you for the New Game Plus run. This game is a challenge already, but the New Game Plus mode is for people who actually go out looking for challenges in games. It is a little disappointing that New Game Plus doesn't have anything neat to make it a new experience. I mean, there's a cool cloak and less health, but I mean something more substantial. Maybe some new enemies, or bosses, or even rooms with more enemies would be nice. Having less health does make you look at the game differently though. You only get 2 squares, and unlike the furry run, this is a big deal. You pretty much die after around 1 hit in most encounters. Enemies that deals 2 squares of damage become instant death machines, and if you mistime the Dirk attack I went over in excruciating detail, then you're already at death's door. This brings up another aspect of this run. Healing during battle is almost pointless. You die so quick, why just stand still to recover 1 measly health point? Just die like a man. That's what this whole game's about anyway. Whoops, sorry, getting ahead of myself. These changes put you in the mind frame to perfect, no damage run almost every room you go through. This recontextualizes certain fights. The bird boss is now a huge threat in New Game Plus because you have to almost perfect, no damage fight him. Taking 1 hit from him puts you out the game. There's no leeway here. I think this is the intended way to play this game. In this mode you have all your favorite abilities, and you also know the placement of every gun and secret you found. You know at least the gist of boss and enemy patterns, so the stricter gameplay is balanced out with your experience. I like this run of the game, and I would say to have truly experienced Hyper Light Drifter, you would have had to have beaten it on New Game Plus. The reason why I can definitively make this claim is because I actually made myself suffer through a naked run of this game. After exploring the boss rush a bit, yes there's a boss rush, I decided the best way to recontextualize the game wasn't to play with no health, but to play with no abilities at all. To explain why this run needed to take place and why it made me hate my life, I guess I need to explain abilities. It would be hard to explain why this game feels wrong without them, and why the raccoon weeb samurai made me scream slurs I didn't even know I was capable of without explaining abilities. So let's talk about abilities and upgrades. I think Hyper Light Drifter can be broken down into 5 parts. Combat, exploration, platforming, trying to understand what the fuck is going on in the story, and upgrading your character with abilities. Platforming and exploration are big parts of the room-to-room gameplay, but let's go over that whenever I feel like writing it. Let's talk about one of the few elements of strategizing that can be done before you actually know what enemies you're going to fight. After you explore an area, you get these little gold squares. These are called gear bits, but I didn't see that name until later, so these are called gold things in my head. You already know which name I'm going to go with in this analysis. Once you have 4 gold bits, you get a full piece. Once you have enough gold pieces, you can go into town and unlock yourself something in the shops. You can upgrade your sword, dashes, health packs, guns, and bombs. The Zelda influence gets bigger and bigger the more you look for it. I think upgrades are necessary, but they're still a little bit disappointing. Some of these upgrades are just passive upgrades, and a lot are just straight up improvements to how many of a thing you can hold. You can hold 5 health packs instead of 3 if you upgrade enough. The upgrade for your guns is to make the clip bigger. This is only neat your first playthrough. After the first playthrough, it's just kinda meh. These are the only upgrades you can come up with? I'm not impressed. Especially since you can only upgrade one gun at a time. You don't find a ton of these gold members your first playthrough, so the only gun you would want to upgrade is the one you would use the most. If only there was a gun that was super OP and you got it early on. Even if you don't use a shotgun, it's still kind of a waste. The bullets literally come back over time, so upgrading the clip isn't a priority. The other upgrades are more interesting. The most important ability in the game is the double dash. You can't dash twice in a row without a short pause in between each dash. The game is so focused on movement, this is kind of a big deal. With this ability, you can dash by pressing the dash button again. This isn't really a double dash ability and more of a consecutive multi-dash ability. You don't just dash twice, you dash as much as your stamina bar will let you. To pull off consecutive dashes though, you'll need to time your button presses to a precise second, or else you'll have to wait the typical small pause. This is tough to pull off, probably so you don't break the game by Nightcrawler flashing all over the place on your first playthrough. This comes at a cost though. Making the dash require a precise button tempo makes it feel inconsistent during combat or any platforming challenge requiring the dash. Having the dash require skill does make the skill ceiling higher, but it makes the player feel like the controls of the game are against them. This is still one of the best abilities though. The double dash means double the distance away from oncoming attacks. Even if you could only pull it off 50% of the time, this is still advantageous for you, because you can die as many times as you want in the game. Like most games, you only have to beat the boss once. Unless you're playing like Hades or something. But in that game you can double dash pretty easy, so trade-offs all around? If only you could hook up with somebody in this game too. The next two that we'll discuss on The Video That Never Ends is the ability to hit back bullets and the dash that lets you absorb them. I love these two abilities, but they don't feel necessary to the game like the double dash does. The timing for knocking back bullets is hard to time, and it doesn't automatically shoot the bullet back at the enemy. It takes skill with this game to pull off a successful rebound to hit the enemy. This ability also allows you to do some stuff with bosses or enemies that shoot projectiles at you. I think that we'll be talking about a boss like that very soon. Being able to pull off a swipe where you knock back a bullet and hit the enemy at the same time in the same swipe makes you feel like a badass action movie hero. The dash that absorbs bullets is cool, but not as flashy. It also takes some getting used to because you don't absorb all the bullets during the entirety of the dash phase. You only absorb bullets at the beginning of the dash, and then absorb all bullets while this absorb phase lingers for a little while. So you can absorb bullets through the entire dash, but you can't absorb bullets through the entire dash. Got it? Good. This has a visual indicator for it, but this took a little while for me to understand how it worked. Because I didn't understand it, I thought it made the game feel more inconsistent. Weird how I consistently bring that word up. Once you understand how it works, you immediately start relying on it to refill your clip. The dash absorbs the bullets, so the bullets go into your gun or something. This means you can do a more tactful, yet dangerous dash in order to safely shoot from a distance. The reason this works is because dashing is an integral part of combat. You gotta dash anyways, so if you get good at it, you get better at the game. Good ability and good game design. Okay, time to speed up through these a bit more quickly. There are a couple dashes that deal damage. There is one where you go through enemies like an anime character. I like this ability, but I have a hard time pulling it off. I don't have much to say outside of that. I'm sure that's surprising seeing the length of this video. The other dash does this badass looking spear move that makes you send an enemy flying away. I hate it. This ability makes me wish I can uninstall abilities. Even if I didn't get a refund for my gold flakes, I wouldn't care. It's all about the length of the time it takes to use the move. It takes a bunch of the stamina bar, and after you pull off the move, it makes you stand still for a while. It looks cool, and it's hilarious to send enemies flying. I would much rather be able to move around freely after my dash, since this whole game is about movement and all. I don't even think you could use it against the bosses. F tier. I've mentioned the stamina bar here a few times. It sounds like an important aspect of the game, but it really isn't. It's just there to make sure you don't abuse abilities over and over again. It doesn't work like that one game's stamina bar does. It doesn't deplete when you swipe your sword, just when you use abilities. Last two abilities. There's a cool sword move and bombs. Bombs are genuinely interesting, and the sword move is not. The sword move reminds me of a specific game series, but I can't put my finger on it. Zelda. Anyway, you think that this would be a useful ability, but slowing myself down to do a power attack just isn't as valuable of an ability to me. You slow down when you're charging up the swipe, and you guys know how I feel about being able to move in this game. There's just rare situations where I'd use this one. People like this one though, and I see content creators actually use it, so I don't think the consensus is that this ability is bad. It definitely isn't an insult of an ability like the spear dash is. Bombs are an actually interesting ability. They're cheap to pick up, and I would recommend getting them for your first playthrough. They're strong, but they have caveats. You roll them out to a distant location, and they damage anyone within a certain radius of the bomb. They replenish over time, so you can't spam them in fights, and the limit is 2, so you can't hoard an army of them for a particular battle. These are nice to throw at groups of enemies or peeking around cover in a tough situation. The radius is pretty big too, so you can potentially clear out a room with a well-placed bomb. Here are the issues. Waiting for bombs is kinda dumb. If you're patient, you can just sit around and wait for the bomb to replenish. Ideally, this would happen when you explore and look for secrets, but this can be broken. If you really wanted to, you could just sit and wait after every encounter. My biggest issue is that I suck at aiming them. I played this game a ton and I still can't consistently aim them in the right direction quickly. I have to stop and conscientiously think about my throw, and I usually want to throw a bomb when I'm overwhelmed with enemies. I've had too many situations where the bomb comes out afterwards or doesn't come out after a perfectly timed dash. This gives that nice inconsistent feeling that's sprinkled throughout the game. I just learned to fight without relying on bombs when playing. They could be lifesavers though, and I would recommend them for tough boss battles. While I don't like having to wait for bombs, I like how there's a different way of replenishing supplies other than the bullet system. I think that having bombs littered around the map like health packs would have been a better system, but I don't know. I'm gonna also try to avoid talking about corrections or fixes that I would make to the game because, they're not tripping about this game. It's been like 5 years and they're working on Solar Ash, so whatever. Now that we've gone through all the abilities, I can talk about the Naked Run. The Naked Run shows the importance of the ability system against bosses, but it also shows how good the core gameplay is in moment-to-moment combat. In this run, I went with no new guns and no abilities or upgrades. I almost thought that you couldn't finish the game without the double dash, but like always, I was wrong. The biggest miss is the shotgun though. Without being able to blow away most enemies, you need to perfect bosses and operate in a way that's different than the New Game Plus run. You can take hits, but you have to slowly chip away at enemies with your pea shooter and your risky sword swipe. For most rooms in the game, this makes fights fun and feel different even though I've played the game a ton before. The bosses though feel worse. The first two that I've covered feel as though they were made like you would fight them without abilities. The other bosses, not so much. I can't go into it without talking about the other bosses, but I'm going to try to stay in order here. Just know that there are a lot of bullets shot at you that you can't absorb, and a lot of moves that are hard to dodge with only one dash. Still, I'm glad I went through it, even if the Crystal Forest boss was a total asshole about it. The Crystal Forest actually has some level design that feels like it needs to be mentioned, and there's more of a story here that's expressed through things that aren't just scribbles on the wall. Sure, the level design can be broken down into cool surface or underground factory like the other sections, but more is done here that's introduced or unique to the actual level. The surface of this level has trees that hide pathways and make walkways a bit harder to follow along with. I would use the word confusing, but other people might find this is more of a natural level design. Following a path doesn't always lead you to the end of the level, and it means you might diverge off into something that's technically side content. It isn't always clear whether or not you could squeeze between two trees to continue to a hidden area or find a shortcut. This is a good thing and a bad thing. Exploration is already obscure enough, we don't need individual trees messing stuff up. This place also loops back around to other paths more than other areas do, so you can loop back to a path you were once on, but not be too sure where you're at exactly in the level. This is a good time to mention the map. There's a map in this game. If you're wondering why I would even bring it up, it's because the best joke in this whole video is this map right here. Visually, it's great. I can see cool landmarks and it has a parchment color palette like a real map. It's almost entirely useless though. I literally never reference the map in this game anymore, not because I know where I'm going. I still get lost in the Crystal Forest all the time, but because the map is too vague to measure where you're at in context with anything. It doesn't give you details of specific surface level routes or even where routes go. If something is notated on the map, there isn't a clear route or any trail of any kind to get there. I just have to look around the area and hope that it isn't behind a ton of trees. The map actually gets brought up in one of Heart Machine's GDC talks. We get this awesome quote from the lead designer about the map.
The answer is really stupidly. We did it really stupidly.
That's fine.
We also get new environmental obstacles in this area that aren't in other ones. The rest of the game gets meshed together, but Crystal Forest actually steps up its game. There are new hurt pads that work differently. You walk over them and have a short moment before they shoot up and deal a ton of damage. There's also crystals that come back after you destroy them. If you're in the same spot as the crystal when it comes back, it traps you in the crystal. You'll have to break out with some swipes to get out. You can actually get hit by enemies in this state too, so it's a hazard you have to keep in mind. Yes, enemies can trip both of these hazards, and it's hilarious when it happens. We also get back our explosive barrels, and we get some locked doors that I don't think are used like this in the rest of the game. The story of this area is much more front and center as well. Back when the Sentinels tried to wipe out the furries, there was a war that broke out in this region. The pro-fur raccoon people, if you can even call them people, created crystal weapons that can fight the Sentinels. The Sentinels weren't alone in trying to kill the furries. I was on their side. And by me, I mean the Drifter. And by the Drifter, I mean his entire race of people. Yeah, the blue people were once a race of people in this game, and they went to war with the raccoons. You could find a pretty cool battle scene of this crystallized for all eternity. After all this time, the crystallized raccoon samurai guys are coming out of their crystal slumber. It's unclear whether they're trying to kill you because you're a blue man and they think the war is still going on, or they've come back as some sort of feral animal. I don't think that they have a conscience about what's going on exactly, because they're working with the Dirks and the dogs to try to kill you, and we'll find out later that it wouldn't make any sense story-wise if they were all working together. Speaking of the raccoon enemies, let's talk about them. The enemies of the west area are more of a mixed bag. Let's start with the one-hit kill enemy of this area. He's a cute little spider who likes to dance around you. The perfect blend of annoying, but also perfectly fair. If he bites you, then you get turned into a crystal the same way I mentioned earlier. Being stuck in the diamond can make things worse for you, so they surprisingly become high-priority targets. Its AI is pretty well designed because it doesn't dive for you right away to die like the other enemies do. It dances around you and waits for the best time to dive in and die. I'm going to use this as a segue to talk about the game's AI as a whole. It's pretty good. It isn't the most complicated programming in the world, but I think it's good for what it's trying to be. Complicated AI doesn't mean good AI in a game like this anyways. Enemies don't shoot walls often unless they're literally giving you suppressing fire. Sure, they dive straight for you to be killed sometimes, and they will jump on some drop pads just to fall to their death, but this feels more like a feature than a bug. Sometimes the enemies dodge your bullets like you do. Every time it happens, I'm always a little pissed off about it, but I'm also impressed. You can't stay mad at an enemy who's just doing a basic survival tactic. Dirks do it, but also our little green samurai here. Lots of Japanese influence in this game, huh? Green weebs have a good amount of health and hit pretty hard. They give a tell that they're going to do a swing with their blade and then they strike. They aren't too interesting and they look a little too similar to the samurai shooty guys. These guys just shoot bullets. Like that's it. They have a different shooting pattern than the rest of the shooting enemies in the game, but the creativity kind of died on this one. They even look like the samurais as well, which doesn't make sense to me. I guess I never learned the part of the samurai code where they say, fuck it, just shoot them. Then there are the D-dogs. There are a lot more of them here and they're still annoying. They like to attack in groups and they circle around you waiting to strike. Unlike the birds that dive for you though, their dive is a lot quicker and they don't die in one swing. They aren't bad when it's just one of them, but when there are multiple enemies, which there usually is, they can get on your nerves. Go ahead and abuse the shotgun with them. Then we have the giant green hulks. These guys have a close range slam attack that turns into a ranged one. They slam and hurt anything in close range and then they send diamonds that shoot off in your location. It's slow enough for you to dodge, so it isn't really a threat. It does make you feel like you aren't always safe enough to not pay attention to that enemy. I like this enemy, but in design only really. Even with the higher health pool, he's just way too easy to kill and too slow to add anything in fights with mixed enemies. I guess you can see why I call the enemies here a mixed bag. Enemies in the north area have a nice balance in attack ranges. Enemies in the east are either dangerous in close range or dangerous at long range. All the enemies in the west are only dangerous when they're up close and in numbers. They're so in your face, but not designed around this mindset. I don't feel like I need to run to get any breathing room from any of the enemies except the dogs. On a positive note, I feel like this area has the best visual and audio design of the game. This is really high praise because this whole game is great in those areas. I'm not an expert in visual and audio design, but just like how I'm not an expert in game design, I'm still going to talk about this stuff like I know what I'm talking about. I know I don't need to talk about the pixel art because you have eyes and can make your own opinion. If you haven't decided the correct opinion yet, the pixel art here is great. It isn't the greatest pixel art of all time, but there's a well-realized style here. I love the color palette most of all. There are pinks and blues that are used in ways you don't see in other games. Like, the sky is constantly this orange color. It's fantastic. Scale is used to great effect as well. We'll see the Sentinels destroyed in all the major regions, and they always look fascinating whenever you run into them. Initially, they make you feel wonder towards the game, but as you progress, you feel that they're just monuments of what happened to these people. Each of the visual designs of the surface areas are lovely and have their own distinct feel to them. I've described the east as serene and the west as confusing and pink. I love the north area's snowing pixels. Even though we're just looking at blocks of color falling across our screen, the snow feels right. The way it falls is so believable that I'm just going to describe the north as brrr. The fuck? The south area is kind of lacking on the surface, but the rain here is almost as good as the snow in the north, so I'll let it pass. Still, the word I would describe the South region is lacking and barren, but that might be the point. The underground areas do blur together when you have to think about them, but the designers tried their best to make them feel different. The North feels like an underground library at times, and the East has floating bodies in the background. The dead bodies everywhere are a questionable stylistic choice, but the execution is on point. Animations in this game are solid. Telegraphs always work, motion always feels good, and I always feel like I'm controlling someone and not sliding around in the game world. I do have to complain about the length of the animations though. For a game with quick combat, there are a lot of unskippable animations that play out very slowly. Like this one animation at the end of certain combat arenas. The Drifter does this cool sword thing. Looks great and adds to the badass feeling we get in the game. On multiple playthroughs though, I just want to skip over this stuff. No speeding past these things though, you gotta watch yourself go down that elevator. The character designs are pretty good. When I look at the characters, the first word that comes to mind is furry. The second is dark Pokemon. Not only is that 2 words, but there's such a thing as dark Pokemon, so that's really confusing, but that's what I'm gonna go with. The way they sound too when you speak with them keeps that vibe going. There's no dialogue in the game, but they do make these deep grunts and gurgles at you that let you know that they're speaking their own language. They sound like the sounds that Pokemon make at the beginning of battle. You know what sound is awesome? The sound that the Green Hulks make when you hit them with your sword. It sounds perfect, yet totally unexpected. The cling that is made just sounds right, and so does destroying technology and other boxes in the game. Everything fits its place and builds the world as the futuristic dystopia that it is. It's unique, and the sound designer of the game did a fantastic job. He has a GDC talk with the composer of the game that's pretty good. I'd recommend checking it out if you like this game at all. Something that people excitingly like to bring up when this game drifts into conversation is the music. I'm gonna have to join in on the circle jerk here and say that it's pretty good. Before I grab the lotion, I do have one complaint that I feel is necessary when speaking about the music. The music is much more about ambience and setting the atmosphere than being something that you would listen to on its own. In the process of setting the scene, Disasterpeace will try to make your ears bleed too every once in a while. But this is all done to set the world. These screeches will happen in moments where the Drifter is terrified, or we'll get a Blade Runner horn drone off when we see the Sentinels. There are supposed to be these scenes where we feel something, and the music only amplifies the emotions. We also get calming music when we're exploring, and the music amps up during boss time. All in all though, I would say that this music isn't really something I would love out of context of this game. In context though, the game is much more powerful with it. Audio design of this game is nothing short of fantastic, and this is a game that I'd recommend playing with some good headphones on. The Crystal Forest is where this all comes together. The soundtrack here is mysterious, the pink trees flaunt the art direction, and the crystals shatter in a satisfying way. The only way this can be improved is if it was capped off with a spectacular boss. So how's the boss in this area? Again, it's a bit of a mixed bag. Top Weeaboo here isn't easy, even if you've played the game multiple times. It's the hardest boss in my opinion, but this would probably be considered one of the best bosses in the game by most people. After my naked run in this game, I have a different view of him. This other view is hatred. I hate him. I kinda rooted for the Blue Man Group to finally finish off these raccoons just because their general was a dick. Explaining these feelings needs me to explain the boss though. He has a diverse moveset and relentlessly uses it against you. Shrek here always runs at you with quick slams, 2 at first and 3 after a halfway point. No, there is no telegraph telling you that phase 2 has started. Eventually he'll slam into the ground to push you away and send diamonds your direction. He shoots a few bullets at you and then repeats. Eventually he'll summon the samurai that are encased in diamonds to help out. This boss is a spike in difficulty and I think he's designed that way. I might be overanalyzing here, but I think this boss is supposed to let players who haven't explored the game as much to turn around and go explore more. You can't beat the game without going past him, so he's a casual filter of sorts. This boss is here to say what the devs can't write out at the bottom of the screen. If you don't have any abilities or guns yet, turn around and go get some. This is fine for any players who accidentally come to this area first. It might even be kinda cool to have this as your first boss, leave to go get upgrades, and then come back better equipped to take him on. I don't think this makes up for the flaws that I found in his design. First flaw is that tracking in this game is really good. Harsh even, and the best example of this is in this fight. His slam attack is tough to dodge. If you try to dash away, he'll be close behind. You can usually avoid moves in games once the animation starts. Enemies are locked into animations and must commit to them. Not this guy though. He likes to follow you and he's good at it. He also does weird, inconsistent things with his strikes. Don't get me started on his hitboxes. His first strike only takes a couple squares of health, but his final strike takes 2 squares. You might think that this is difficult for New Game Plus players, since this would be an instant kill. And yeah, it was. It's even harder if you can't use the double dash ability. Dashes have to be perfectly timed and expertly aimed, or else you'll lose a chunk of your health. You probably aren't getting it back because finding time to heal is difficult. There's no breathing room with this boss. This relentless feeling can be an exciting challenge. Under the wrong conditions though, it feels like unfair suffocation. Without abilities, when he slams into the ground and shoots at you, there isn't much you can do here to be active in the fight outside of dodging. This feels like sitting and waiting for the phase to be over, but not relaxed enough to get your health back. If you're an MLG pro like me, you might be able to sneak in some hits, but shooting him is most likely the only option players are going to have here. There just doesn't feel like a lot of options with this boss when you don't have abilities. When you have abilities, you can knock back and absorb bullets and send bombs if you don't suck at them like I do. If you don't make the right choices when upgrading, this boss can be more difficult than necessary. If you don't make the right choices, you won't have any options. When I say it like that, it sounds like there isn't any options with the upgrades either. Am I the one in the wrong here? No, it's the boss that's wrong. Let's talk about his summons. Shrek-kun will kill them if he gets too close to the crystal, which is cool. You can actually bait this too. If you do it too much though, he just decides to start summoning them instead. This makes moving around this relentless boss even more suffocating. If you don't have a shotgun, you can't take this boss or his minions out quickly, so this battle drags. I know I've complained about this boss a ton. I do enjoy this boss when you play the game the right way. I just think a lot of players can accidentally stumble onto this boss too early, and you're kind of forced to play a certain way against him when you limit yourself. This is one of the best bosses in the game, but at the same time one of the worst. I hope you enjoyed my odd to describe take on potentially one of the best bosses in the game. Okay, we've gotten through a ton on this review, but there's still a ton left. Before I continue to the south area, I should cover the last two elements of the game. I've said this before, but I believe Hyper Light Drifter is made of 5 aspects in total: combat, platforming, exploration, upgrading, and figuring out the story. I've gone over combat a ton already because I believe it's the best part of the game. I might come across as disliking the story or how it's told, but I do like it. I think trying to understand it is actually an engaging process, so I count it as gameplay. You could think of this as time you spend in the game watching cutscenes if you want. I've talked about abilities and guns and how you can upgrade them. These decisions are important, but upgrading is necessary. I think many of the upgrades are boring and a missed opportunity. Some of them make the game feel like how the game is supposed to be played though. Let's talk about the last two, exploration and platforming. Exploration is one of the biggest elements of the game that you'll spend your time on. Players of the game are probably surprised that I would mention so many things before I got to this. It's because my opinion is mixed and constantly changing and built on memories from 5 years ago. I drink way too much to have a solid opinion on the exploration of this game. I'm gonna try though. My opinion of exploration of Hyper Light Drifter sways back and forth between awful and totally passable. I want to say it's good because finding secrets in games is fun. You could find the secrets in a few ways. You could find them behind destructible boxes, which is great because you're already incentivized to destroy these boxes to reload your gun. You could also find hidden paths that can't be seen due to the angle of the camera. There are also these invisible platforms you can dash onto. We'll get to these invisible platforms in a minute. Walking around an area on first glance, you most likely won't find these secrets. If you take some time to actively use your eyes, you might find something off with the area that leads to some goodies. When I first played the game, they didn't have these handy square indicators that showed where the secrets were. That means exploring for me when I first played the game was just hugging a wall and hoping that the wall would let me in. I don't remember how I felt when I found out that there were random invisible platforms I can jump on. This guessing part of the game goes away with this square thing, right? Well, the square thing doesn't show up for every secret, but for the most part, yeah. Except now most secrets have a signpost, so is it even a secret to find while exploring a level? Not that finding these areas were really exploring a level. More like finding a place that lets you diverge from the expected path. So what are we actually finding when we do find a secret? We could find a variety of stuff. We could find gold farkles or something as simple as a health pack. Sometimes we find an enemy. Just because it's a bad surprise doesn't mean that it isn't a good addition to the secret pile. We could also find monoliths and keycards. What are those? It doesn't matter because if you don't find all of them, it doesn't matter. If you commit to collecting them, then you'll eventually get rewarded. Keycards help you unlock doors to find better goodies. Sometimes it's a gun, but the coolest ones are always fresh new outfits. The monoliths are a cool name given to the rocks that have this dyslexic writing on it. If you don't have the codex, it isn't important. What is important is that unlocking all of them gives you a fresh new outfit. That's pretty much it. Not all that exciting, but it's something. On replays of the game, I don't even interact with the rocks and the keys. I won't find enough keys to use them to open more than 1 or 2 doors, and players will be lucky to find 4 or 5 on their first playthrough, but you would need 12 to unlock some of the endgame content here. This leads to a huge negative on the exploration of the game. Goodies you find while exploring aren't useful to you, unless you're the type that likes to go for 100% on games. I like to get into this mindset with almost every game I play, but that idea gets killed off when I get to the end and I find out I haven't even discovered 25% of the collectibles, especially when the collectibles just unlock that stupid spear move I complained about earlier. The best collectibles are the goldfish and the shards that you find to progress the game. Keycards are nice too, and outfits are cool, but those are really rare finds. The shards not only progress the game, but they also allow you to get behind these locked off doors, and the tantalizing doors really pique your curiosity. Man, if only I had one more shard or more keycards, I could see what's behind this door. Too bad they're hidden behind obscure pathways and invisible platforms. I want to complain about the invisible platforms now. I could see the platforms being an oh shit moment. It might make you wonder what else this game has in store for you. For me, this means jumping off every cliff that looks like it might have a secret invisible platform because the design of the cliff kinda looks like it would be there for some reason. Remember those square things I mentioned earlier? If you stand over them and hit the interact button, it'll flash these platforms for you. I'm gonna let you know that now because I didn't learn that until I finished writing my first draft of the script. I jumped off a lot of cliffs to get here. I want to give this the passable tag though because it helps with the pacing of the game. I probably made this come across as useless filler, but I think it's necessary for the player to break up the action. There's so much intense combat going from room to room, doing nothing but killing will just get stale, even with this great core gameplay. Having some quiet time where you actually try to interact with the environment on your own terms is exactly what the player needs. Even if they don't find a secret, they'll still get a break from the next combat challenge. If they did find something, even just a health packet helps them with their overall journey, and that feels worth it. Plus, there is a ton of stuff to find. Trying to find it all will make you want to jump off a cliff in real life, but with this much stuff, you're bound to find enough to make exploring each room worth it. I doubt most first-time players would even find a third of the stuff in this game. Hell, I played this game multiple times and I couldn't find everything until I used a guide. Platforming. What even is it? What are we even jumping on? Why are we even jumping on it? Why am I using so many questions to make an interesting transition? Platforming in Hyper Light Drifter is tied to the dash feature. We aren't jumping per se, but the dashes are essentially the same when it comes to platforming. Instead of timing well-placed jumps, we're timing well-placed dashes. Platforming sections are usually short or optional. You usually have to perform correctly timed dashes to avoid getting hurt by a dropping platform or a hurt pad. These obstacles will either damage you or make you restart the challenge. In the case of the slamming blocks that you run into, they just one-shot your ass and make you reload the game. That's kinda harsh and probably the reason why I won't be able to get the platinum in this game. Dashing challenges are typically more fun, yet optional side things. They test not only your ability to aim dashes correctly, but keeping the tempo of the strictly timed continuous dash ability. These challenges are another reason why I would say the double dash is essential to the game. You can't reasonably do any of these without it. These dashes usually lead to the usual exploration goodies, so you do most of them for the joy of jumping. The hardest of these dash challenges you find in a shop where you upgrade your dash. I've seen this room on the back of my eyelids before going to bed at night. To unlock all the outfits in this game, you have to dash around this room in a circle. You have to do it continuously without breaking the dash 800 times. It's a little tough. I don't usually do dexterity challenges like this, mindless ones where you just test how good you are at doing a precise task for 5 minutes or something. I just suck at this one. But I convinced myself that if I can complete this challenge in this game, I can complete any challenge in life. I worked at it for hours over the course of days. I almost gave up until I saw Joseph Anderson do it on his 3rd try. So I worked at it. I set aside time and practiced every day. This wasn't like I got stuck at 100 and I couldn't get past it. No, I would regularly get past 300 and fail. This was a slow burn that I worked my way up. 400, 600. It was hard and I just kept messing up and hitting the walls and breaking the tempo, but I couldn't just give up because if I give up on this, then I give up on everything. If I fail this challenge, I will never finish college. And then one day I did it. It just happened. So the moral of the story here is that you too can finish college. I like this game's version of platforming. I personally think that platforming is integrated in every movement-based combat game. Precisely moving yourself into the best position to attack a boss and timing your dodge at just the right time isn't really all that different from timing a jump on a platform. Memorizing how to move around a boss pattern isn't that different from memorizing a level in Mario. I think this analysis is a little too much, so I'm just going to leave it at, yeah, there's platforming in this game. Now we can move to the south area, the final area. With the final area, you could expect there to be an extravagant spectacle of an, it's a barren wasteland. Well, that can be cool as long as most of the area isn't an underground factory. Well, that makes critiquing it easy. The top area is basically for show. There isn't anything up here but pathways that lead you to the underground areas, unless you get all 8 shards in the area. The surface area's design is nice, but I feel like the design of the underground area fits more with the story the devs were trying to tell. The underground's level design is just a mix-up of all the underground designs from all the other areas. This place feels a bit more creative because they've exhausted all the simple ideas from the other arenas in the earlier parts of the game. This makes the level design here feel more fulfilling and the best of the underground factories. A brave design of this area too is that instead of one final boss at the end of the entire region, we have 4 potential bosses we can run into. I'll talk about the bosses, but first we have to go through everyone's favorite part of the video, the needlessly going through every enemy part. Hopefully I cut this bit in editing. I'm going to try to be quick, but you know. First, I'm going to go over a couple enemies that we see in other regions, but show up prominently here. There's this unnecessarily ugly-ass Dirk that's huge and looks like shit. I'm not even sure I can come up with a better name than Ugly Guy, but that's just what I gotta go with. Ugly Guy jumps in the air and lands on you. They can also swing their ugly hand, and that's it. They have a high health pool, though. It's 1 shotgun blast and 2 swipes big. You can do all that damage before he even finishes his first swing. It isn't threatening, especially when you can easily get it to jump off the end of an arena. Like, this isn't a rare thing either. First-time players will see this happen like 4 times. It's not a bug, it's a feature. Rocket guys are assholes. We see them a ton here and they don't play fair. All they do is shoot rockets, but the rockets are honing and they explode. They have splash damage and they can knock you onto the ground. I can't stress how much getting knocked on the ground sucks in this game, because once you're on the ground, you can get hit again, so enemies can just hit you multiple times back to back after you get knocked down. The rocket guys have a good amount of health too, and their hitbox is small enough so that you can't always pull off the shotgun cheese on them. If you miss time getting close to them, they can just pull a poor taste Middle Eastern joke here, blow you up with them. The only way to avoid rockets too is to get really good at dodging or cut the rocket in mid-air. It's tough to do that, but if you can pull it off, you will guaranteed feel like the biggest badass in the world. Let's talk more about region-specific enemies now. The Yes Man robot of the area is the most notable one. He's a close to mid-range enemy that can fuck you up. His melee hit and his shotgun blast can melt your health if you don't take him out quickly. This enemy gets mixed up with other enemies and other Yes Men in small rooms too. If you have the bullet knockback ability, you can knock back all the bullets back at him and feel like a badass. This game gives you lots of opportunities to feel, as the kids would say, gangster AF dab. After that, we're done with the enemies. Not really. There's a small slime guy and there's a spider that pops up literally randomly. I like those little spider guys, but they're so easy to kill that they aren't really worth mentioning, so I'll just move on. Before we get to the bosses, I should probably go over this area's story. The first scene that you see when you walk into the area is Pink Guy. Oh yeah, forgot about him. He's on his knees and he is not looking tip-top. This is genuinely depressing, but I can't help but roast this guy. I know he's down, but I just gotta kick him. First off, this is the worst pixel art of the game. When I first played the game, I didn't even know what the fuck was on the ground. I thought it was a dead body. While I do think that the Pink Guy is one of the most important characters of the game, it's really easy to forget about him. Sure, we see him in every area, and he lets us know about the shards, but signs of him helping us outside of that isn't apparent. Like, what was he doing that whole time? Killing people and looking badass? Definitely not getting shards, even though he knew where they were. These probably aren't thoughts I should be having right before he gives his horrific final words to us. In his last moments, he tells his story. He had a family, a wife, a daughter. It could be assumed that the disease took them. He turned around to leave them for the final time, just to walk out and face his new destiny. Maybe I was a tad harsh on the poor guy. Let's move on for now. Like, the topic will move on. We won't move on emotionally or whatever. The underground factory in this area has a lot going for it. Sort of like how the dead bodies of the East region will catch your eye, or how you'll see war scenes in the West region. The environment will teach you about what's going on here. We'll also get some of the best pixel art in the game. Machines are all being made here, test tube babies are growing, and enemies you've been fighting the whole time are midway through their assembly line. Just like the outside world, we see the potential war machines that ravage the land in this area. Except these machines aren't rested. They're close to completion. When we meet the people of this land, they don't feel like part of it. Some of the lizards scurry away from you. One old one who's too tired to be afraid tells you a story. They went down to the underground factory, and it looks like they awoke something. Looking at the text, it looks like people of the south area were creators of new technology. They were good at it, and things got out of hand. Real out of hand. After all this time, the lizard people seem to be a lot more chill. They started the invasion again out of curiosity. Instead of this being Jurassic Park, it was more like a whoopsie-daisy. This explains why things are acting up again and why machines and Dirks are rising. The bad news here is we see a new Sentinel being built or restored. The entire area has this sense of impending doom. Even the pink guy fills the vibe of this area. We're starting to get to some of the central themes of the story here, but I'm going to save the final story analysis until we have the whole picture. One last thing before we go on to the fun stuff. While a lot of Dirks and other enemies are being made here, there are some blue guys who look awfully familiar being grown here. Yeah, the consensus is that the Drifter was a race of people that were genetically made to be soldiers. They were used to go to war with the raccoon people and who knows what else. So the Drifter being a killing machine that just walks into a region and cleans up the place makes sense story-wise. And that's all we're gonna say on that. Let's move on to some more fun stuff and talk about the bosses. Since we're preventing the future where the Terminators take over the world, we fight 4 robot bosses in this arena. You can fight a couple of them, but a lot of them are optional. I think that most players are going to want to see all the bosses, but missing content in this game is pretty easy to do. While having 4 bosses in the final area is cool, sadly some of them are the worst bosses in the game. There's just 1 or 2 neat ideas thrown together, instead of a fully formed boss with a varied moveset. I can forgive this though. There's still some good design here, and the final boss of the entire game is right after this. I would promise to be quick about going over the bosses, but I'm just tired of lying to you. The first boss I want to talk about is hopefully the first boss most players run into. The drone boss has the coolest entry in the game. It's better than the final boss. You go up to a shard you find, and when you open it, an explosion happens and the boss pops out. Sure, I expected it because the shard is in a boss-sized room, but kudos for trying to make it a surprise. Too bad he's the worst boss in the game. He summons 5 little drones that are easy to kill but hard to hit. After a bit, they float around and shoot a barrage of bullets at you. While the bullet hell this game puts you in is pretty neat, it's awful if you've never unlocked an ability that deals with projectiles. It does look pretty cool, and the first time you play this game, this is definitely a moment where you audibly shout in amazement. The secret to this guy is that you have to be super aggressive. His summons for the drones are really slow and he doesn't move while he does it, so you can just unload a flurry of hits and shotgun shells into him. If your hits are well placed enough, you can destroy most, if not all of the drones. This makes the fight too easy and makes you realize that all the boss does is fly around and sometimes charge at you. Neat concept, but every time the bullet hell mode activates, it becomes a bullet slideshow on my base model PS4. Scythe boss is also simple and easy once you understand him. The whole idea behind this boss is that he just kinda swings a scythe. Sometimes he throws the scythe. If you get all the timings down, it's only a matter of time before he goes down. The only neat thing about this boss is that you can't shoot through the swings of his blade. This kinda makes you have to be more considerate of the timing and positioning when using guns. That's about it. Ball boss summons balls and shoots the balls at you. This boss is a lot like Big Bird boss. He's simple, but the simple concept is executed so well that they become a good boss. He could summon the balls and initially they just rotate around him protecting him. Then they're shot at you and he does a rush attack. This is his entire pattern, and his second phase heats things up by adding more balls and giving you less floor space to work with. Ball boss, and yes, I'm going to keep calling him that, is another boss that changes considerably after you play with some restrictions. On New Game Plus, he is an asshole. Those balls hurt a lot when they touch you, still not a furry, and they take out 2 squares. His first phase isn't tough, but in his second phase he rarely has a safe time to attack. Once he has 4 balls, every guy's dream, you can't attack him until he finishes his attack. He can also trap you in the corner pretty easily. Without the ability to knock back the orbs, balls, there's less to do during this phase. That doesn't automatically make him an easy boss once you have the ability. I like this boss, even though he pissed me off too. I think all the bosses I've considered good have pissed me off at one point in time. The last boss is the Archer. The Archer shoots laser arrows at you. Weird to use a futuristic technology like lasers and then revert back to a bow. I don't know how the tech works here. He runs around and shoots arrows. Every once in a while he'll throw landmines on the ground, making it harder to keep up with them. The landmines can be taken out with a bomb, or you could set them off yourself if you're good at the game. This boss isn't super easy and has a little going on for him. I would say this boss is the most fleshed out of the group, but I still find him disappointing. Even his death animation is whack. When you kill a boss in this game, they don't just die, they get fucking murdered. Big Bird gets decapitated and coughs out blood when he doesn't even have a mouth anymore. The frog's stomach explodes. Some of them just outright explode in general, but not this guy. He just kind of falls over like, I'm dead now, I guess. Like, die cooler, man. I know that there's another version of this boss out there, but I don't want to purchase another version of this game to get footage and share my shitty opinion. If you want to know my opinion on the content for the Switch and iOS version of the game, all you have to do is watch this video on a Switch or iOS device to get that additional content. If you can't do that, then sucks to suck. With that out the way, let's finish up this game. Now that we've completed the last area, we can finally move back to the center of town where we can enter the end of the game. There really isn't anything to the last section, just a cool elevator ride and a cool walkway to the final boss. There's a ton of coughing, and when we get to see the arena, we can finally see the diamond thing in person. The weird diamond thing we've been hallucinating this whole time is finally in front of us. We open the doors and shit, it's ugly. There's an easy to guess story reason here, but we're gonna put that aside for now to point out that it just looks like shit. Then the final boss, Judgment, pops up. The guy that's been taunting us the whole game, killing us for fun, is finally here. Now, we can return the favor. This big black guy is probably the best boss in the game. No, I'm not gonna name him that. He has a pretty definitive name. Judgment has a varied moveset that isn't too difficult to deal with, but isn't easy to master. You have a lot of options with dealing with his patterns, but like a lot of bosses in the game, without abilities, you can feel limited on what you can do in the fight. He forces you to move around, and is Judgment even a dude? I've been calling everyone in this game a guy so far, but that might not be their gender. The only confirmed girl in the game that I found is the furry, but I didn't research it too much. Not to limit women or anything like that. Like, all these horrible monsters could be girls. I mean, most of the women I know in my life are horrible monsters. Judgment always starts off with slamming themselves against the wall. A well-timed dodge out of the way is all you need to do to avoid it. Then it goes to corners of the room and shoots bullets at you in a circular pattern. If you get good enough with the knockback swipe, you can hit back a couple rows of these bullets in just one swipe. It gets tough to do that later in the fight because there are more rows of bullets in the late stages. Without abilities, it can be tough to deal with, and you can't do anything in this section of the fight except run away really good. I'm gonna try not to mention abilities here. Since it's the final boss of the game, it can be expected that the player, even one who didn't explore much, would have a ton of upgrades by now. Hopefully you would have those important upgrades I emphasized earlier. Double dash, absorb dash, the knockback swipe, and you know. After the bullets, it unleashes a widespread flamethrower. Getting caught in it isn't game over, but it can knock you down and hit you over and over. That would be a game over, I guess. This combination of the bullets and flamethrower attack makes you move around and makes it so that getting up close is hard to do. You can get used to the positioning of the blast pattern, and try to find a safe spot to get close to Judgment. The pattern of this boss is predictable to the point where I can tell you it as though it's a set order of events. Stuff like this, though, keeps you on your toes and makes it hard to cheat this boss out of a fair fight. After a bit, the boss will go into the center of the arena and shoot hentai tentacles at you. I like this phase for two reasons. We can either just dodge the tentacles, like I do in real life, or we can risk trying to do damage to Daddy Judgment. Or Mommy Judgment, if you're into that. Using the gun is best here, but getting close is risky because of the tentacle pattern. If you haven't noticed by now, a lot of this boss's design avoids letting us abuse the shotgun. I think it's for the better, seeing as how it's the best strategy for every other boss in the game. The timings of the tentacle phase changes over the fight, making getting close or predicting the pattern even harder. I like this boss, and I think its moveset is well-rounded and fair. The worst part is the transition phase. If you deal enough damage to the boss, you can skip the tentacle phase, and the screen will go black or purple or whatever. These square bombs show up and start to meander around. Then the arena comes back and the boss slams his way in. When the boss slams, the square bombs explode. You could try to destroy these square things, and you can manipulate its movement by making it follow you. So, you have options, but I feel like these options are more brain dead and not as dexterity based as the other options are. Making the arena disappear doesn't make the fight any different either. I almost always know where I am on the arena. After the boss comes, there's all sorts of splash damage that isn't telegraphed to you in a way that you can predict on your first playthrough. I'm not as impressed with this section of the fight, but it does indicate a phase shift pretty well. And that's it. A step-by-step beat of how this boss works. This is a great boss to end the game on, and losing to it only means that you just have to get better at the game, maybe upgrading a bit, but the game lets you go back and explore it. But we have to finish the story of the game before we can do anything like that. We go in for the finishing move, and this happens. Yep, Judgment was in our head the entire time. Not that this was a surprise to me, just a confirmation. It wasn't like anyone else was being killed by this guy. Pink Guy kinda confirms that he sees the exact same thing too, but in his own way. After the diamond is stabbed, we leave. The Drifter runs out of there and lives happily ever after. And by that I mean he coughs up a bunch of blood, lays on the ground, and dies. The ending cinematic plays. We see the dog go back into his dark tower, the lights of all the races start to crumble, then we see the Drifter teleport back to the beginning of the game. He's alive. He's safe, and that part was all in his head. Never mind. Well, at least things look peaceful. And that's the main game. There's a decent amount of endgame content. You can go collect stuff, and there's a couple of mini-games. The boss rush is unlocked if you beat the game, and it could be fun to go through if you like the bosses in the game. I'd recommend the New Game Plus version of the game though, but I've already raved enough about that. After a couple of the regions in the game are finished, you unlock a soccer game that you can play. If you're from another country, you probably know soccer better by its other name, Ground Rolly. This is just a novelty though. The AI is an asshole and can knock you over, but you can't hurt it. I only beat it by cheesing the AI. There's this horde mode as well. I was really happy once I found out that there was a horde mode in the game. While playing the game, I appreciated that enemies were in their own designated sections, but I wished I could fight all the enemies mixed together to see how it would work out. Horde mode does have a mode like this. I hate it. To get to it, you have to beat 10 waves of enemies from each of the 4 regions. The west side enemies are boring, but fair for the most part. The north section enemies are spread out so that it can be hard to see the shaman guys spawn. It's tougher to abuse the shotgun as well when 3 of them are in the same corner. Still, not that bad. South and east enemies is where things start to be a problem. The roided out plant guys from the east section are outright offensive with how they're designed here. They have the capability of activating their dive attack as they're spawning, and it shows how the designers crafted every arena to avoid the bullshit that happens in this randomly generated mode. It isn't anything compared to the South region's enemies though. In this mode, we get our last enemy that you don't see much in the main game. There's another huge Dirk that carries a minigun. When I first ran into him, I thought to myself, why do they have this enemy behind a door that most players aren't going to see? Why did they lock away this content? After playing through Horde mode a ton, I could only guess 2 reasons. Either he's too difficult, or he's just too boring. He shoots a barrage of bullets at you that's no fun to fight. Getting close to him is too dangerous because he shoots so many bullets it can just destroy your health. You can't bounce back all the bullets with a swipe, or absorb them, or be super aggressive because of his high health pool. So all you can do is sit behind cover and wait to sneak in some shots or hits between barrages. These guys are really rare in the main game, but show up a ton in Horde mode, along with the rocket guys. The rocket guys are also awful to deal with for the same reason that the roided plants are. They can shoot missiles as they're spawning. These missiles are honing and they can shoot multiple, and there can be more than one of them. So all in all, the Horde mode is a challenge that's welcome, it just isn't a fair or well-balanced challenge that feels rewarding to grind away at. So now that I've complained about almost every facet of the gameplay that I wanted to, there's one last section of the game we have to discuss, and it's a doozy. The story of Hyper Light Drifter. I think most players would see Hyper Light Drifter as an abstract game. A game where things that happen or items that are shown are less important as actual story-driven elements, and more as symbols that are meant to represent something. A lot of games do this, or there are games that have stories that can't be figured out without looking up some information about it online. I like games that are shy about telling exactly what their story is about. I think that I've made fun of this game for being like that, but the truth is that I like games like Inside and Limbo. Trying to figure out the story is part of the fun, and coming up with my own personal meaning behind what I just experienced makes the story feel personal to me. That being said, I can see how people might get upset whenever abstract stories that don't give you tangible meanings are connected to games that don't have a lot going on gameplay-wise. I can also understand if somebody wouldn't want to work for their story as much as some games, books, or movies make you at times. Not every story is for everyone. I think Hyper Light Drifter works as both an abstract story and a story where the main theme is being explored. There's only 2 pieces of information you would need to make this game shine in a totally different light. Before I talk about that, I want to talk about my personal interpretation of the story. I don't think my interpretation is the correct one, but it's a conclusion I came to after I finished the game a few times. I liked this meaning before I learned what the actual story of the game was, so I wanted to share it with you. My first interpretation of the story was that the Drifter was a byproduct of this same technology, so maybe it's a story of redemption. There's a ton of aspects here that we can go through on what it might be, and in my first script I went over how I felt about all this. Once you know the background of the game, this story is definitely about one major theme. So what's Hyper Light Drifter about? Hey guys, did you know that the lead designer and creator of Heart Machine has a heart thingy? He had to have his heart fixed. This is why it's called Heart Machine, because he had to have a heart. Okay, sorry about that. I know I should handle this very serious story of Alex Preston with more sincerity, but every analysis or interview with Alex during the making of Hyper Light Drifter brings up that Alex had an issue with his heart and had to have surgery during the making of the game. This was serious, life-threatening stuff, and Alex wasn't sure he was going to be able to make it through the entirety of the game's development. But they had backers to satisfy, so he had to keep going. This is the first piece of information that changes the meaning of the game. Alex wasn't too sure he was going to live to make it. I've already brought up the second piece of information, the scribbles on the wall that I've mentioned throughout the video. They actually translate to something, and when you piece it all together, it gives us a canonical story of each of the regions of the game and the lore of the world. So with these two pieces of information, the translation on the monoliths and the knowledge of Alex Preston's condition, we can talk about the meaning behind Hyper Light Drifter, facing your own mortality. Before I give an awful breakdown of everything, I should point out a couple videos I found on Hyper Light Drifter. A YouTuber, who needs way more subscribers than he has, made a breakdown of the story that's better than any of the videos I watched as research. Harrison Consoli's video, The Beautiful Metaphor of Hyper Light Drifter, is 1,000 times better than my shitty video. I would say that if you want to hear an analysis of this game's story, that's the video that you should go watch instead. Even still, it's only the second best video about Hyper Light Drifter I've found. Night Margin's video, Hyper Light Drifter But It's the Good Ending, is the best video about the game I have ever seen. If you like this game, you owe it to yourself to check these videos out. It is strange because these videos are great content about a game that is years old. These two put in a lot of time and effort into videos for a community that's moved on to other things for the most part. I think these videos are worth the watch. And while we're shouting out people, thanks to Taraj42 for showing me where all the secrets are. I'd have given up if it wasn't for your videos. And thanks to the entire community. There are great resources out there for bosses and collectibles that helped out a ton with this video. Yes guys, it's starting to get to the end. We all have to face the end eventually. Death and taxes is something that we can all understand about ourselves. It gets tough to understand that it won't just be us that dies, but everyone we know or ever will know will also die. Cultures and civilizations will die. Give it a few more billion years and our sun will die as well. It's something that's better to understand and accept rather than run from. Before the giant explosion that happened in the opening cinematic, there were 4 races. All of them were up to their own stuff, but they all worked together to build the Immortal Cell, also known as the diamond thing that the Drifter kept diving for. This cell was made to try to keep everyone, well, immortal. What it actually did was spawn our big bad of the game, Judgment. So, in the search of trying to be immortal, they all ended up creating the thing that would try to wipe them out. To further confirm this, all the races have different issues that arise from them trying to avoid their fate. The people in the North are the best example. They're cultist birds who sacrifice others in order to stay immortal. To prolong life, they have to take it. It was all going well too until this guy came in with this one crazy trick. The people in the East ran from their problems into their temple. It worked too until one race that can walk on water decided that the otters had a little too much skin. Them saying you looking like a snack meant something totally different. The people in the West created weapons to defend themselves. They made crystal weapons to fight off their deaths, and in the process were frozen in time forever. The lizards in the South use technology, and as Black Mirror has taught us, anyone who relies on technology is a total asshole and gay. All the different forest creatures work together to try to make something that would keep them immortal forever. The Immortal Cell. The Drifter is a person who's running from his potential death. He has a disease and it's claimed other people. He's shown visions of the Immortal Cell by the Dog God. To hammer home the theme of immortality, this isn't a dog. Yeah guys, I knew it wasn't a dog the entire time. The jackal is supposed to represent Anubis, who's the god of the afterlife. He's also envisioned to be daddy mode for some reason. Anubis dog gives these visions to the Drifter to make him hunt out the cell. Gameplay kind of fits with the story as well. The Drifter was built to be a killing machine and he ends people's lives. When he gets to the final boss, his or her name is Judgment. We know their name is Judgment because all the bosses have Steam cards that are named after tarot cards. I get why they went with Judgment, but I think this video is proof enough that Heart Machine should have contacted me to do the naming. Judgment isn't a judge on the Drifter's skill at killing, it's whether or not the Drifter is willing to end things. In the final blow, he doesn't kill the boss, he kills the technology that was created to try to keep everyone immortal. Regardless of whether or not this was subconsciously intentional or he was tricked, the Drifter is now forced to accept his own mortality. The Drifter didn't do all of his actions throughout the game to live, he did it to die. The knowledge that the lead creator of this game was unsure whether or not he'd make it through this game's development adds to the power of the story. This all feels less like abstract cool imagery and more like a game with a specific purpose. I'm glad this game stayed in my head for all these years, because exploring it thoroughly like this figuratively and literally, made me come to accept something that we all have to. That things will end. So thanks, Alex. And thanks to everybody at Heart Machine, because this game is great. The game has a solid gameplay loop, and even if there are some flaws, I still recommend it. It undeniably looks and sounds great, and these creatures, that aren't sexy at all, represent a real struggle with mortality that we all face. Now that I've gone through all this, I think it's best that I put Hyper Light Drifter to rest. This game has lived in my head with the words ringing Game of the Year, but I'm glad I revisited it. Now I can defend those claims I've made. Soon we'll have Solar Ash and hopefully another game that can take that title for real. For now though, my time with Hyper Light Drifter is over. And this fucking video is over. Holy shit, that was like hours of... Oh my gosh. Hey there, Ben here. Just finished up all the editing. Just want to come in and say in the epilogue, thanks for checking out my video. If you made it all the way to the end, I'm pretty impressed. It got pretty bad there towards the end. Sorry about the editing. If the editing was weird or the jokes were weird, I planned on fixing up some of the jokes with editing, and unfortunately I wanted to get this out before Solar Ash came out, and it comes out tomorrow, so I had to make some compromises and some stuff had to get cut. I had to cut that one part, and funny thing is that even though I talked about everything to death, which I probably shouldn't have, I still missed some stuff that I feel like should have been added in that I thought of while editing this. And so I'm going to mention that right now. So stuff I should have mentioned but didn't. Number one, if you do plan on playing this game, play it on PC. A lot of people can get it on Switch and PS4, and I think that they like it on Switch. But personally, I think that I played it on base model PS4. I would recommend playing it on your PC. I think that the performance just is miles better and just works a lot better, and you can do a lot more stuff on it because the community is based around the PC version, and it just runs so much better. It's just worth it to do it on that. A complaint about the game that I forgot to mention, the one that bothered me the most, is that the world is static. I'm using the phrase from a Super Bunny Hops video review of the game. You can go in to like the east area, clear out all the frogs, kill the frog boss, and when you go to see that otter who's all chained up, he's still chained up, being like, "Man, I wish I can get free." It's like, no, we killed everyone. Like, you're good, you're free. But the world doesn't change. The world doesn't change until the credits roll, I guess. But the only thing that changes in the world is that some characters now show up in the center of town, but that isn't good enough. I feel like there should have been more. The last thing is that the checkpoint system and the camera of the game will just randomly fuck you at times. For 90% of the game, they both work. It's pretty impressive with the camera. The camera will just do whatever it wants sometimes, and will just be like, hey, look at this, for no reason other than just because it wants you to. And the checkpoint system will randomly fuck you, but it works for 90% of the time. It's just that 10% of the time it really is noticeable, and that's kind of bad for a 5-hour game. I should have mentioned that, but instead I decided to talk about all the enemies for no reason. Last thing is that there is a co-op mode, so if that means something to you, it's there. I played it a little bit. It seems fun. It seems like you should really do it with somebody who knows how to play the game while you're playing it, though. But if you're thinking about getting the game and that's something, then hey, it's something. Thanks again for watching the video. I'll be doing indie reviews for the next couple videos, so if you're into that, keep in touch. Have a good one, and let's hope Solar Ash is good. Bye.